Alrighty, well, thank you everyone for joining and welcome to April Office Hours. This is a program that we launched this year, really as a way to bring our community members together. And so far, I mean, this is our fourth Office Hours. I think we're all proud of the program that it's evolving into. It's been a great opportunity for our customers, our ACEs, our prospects at Aviatrix to come together, to meet each other, to meet some of our experts. So it's been mutually beneficial, I think, for all of us. So we are totally learning and growing, and this program is evolving as we go. So your feedback is really, really important to us. So thank you so far for the feedback that we've received from our repeat offenders. And I see that there are some of you again, see you again here this morning. So thank you for joining us again. So this month, we have Chris McHenry on. He is VP of Product Management at Aviatrix, and he specializes in security. Hence our topic, the world of cloud security this month, really as a way to get folks excited about the RSA Conference, like Chris did just mention. So every month, we flip back and forth between industry topics like this month and more personal or career-oriented topics like we'll dive into next month for leveraging LinkedIn for networking opportunities. So we hope to see you guys there too. But I think with that, I will pass it over to Shazad, my co-host, and of course to Chris, our guest speaker today. So thanks again for joining.
Right, thanks, Katie. Yeah, so guys, thanks again joining in. The format is very informal, so you guys can go off mute. You can have your camera turned on and you can ask any question about the security, obviously. But if you have some other questions, don't be shy. This is your forum. And please be vocal, please engage in the discussion and yeah, get this conversation going. So just to get started, obviously, Chris, I know you are very busy. Chris is a very important name in the cloud networking and security industry. He has been featured in a number of different places. Recently, he was part of the AWS Twitch show. I would really appreciate you guys to go search it up. We'll post the link also here and watch that show as well. Yeah, so Chris, I would start with a very important question, top of the mind question about the current trend in cloud security, right? So obviously, cloud is shaping up. Security is actually for some is very new into the cloud. So could you share your insights into the most pressing security challenges facing by the organizations, enterprises, and how Aviatrix security solutions are helping enterprises to tackle them?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shazad, and my pleasure. Anytime. Like I said, I love having the opportunity to connect with practitioners and with customers and help give people kind of ideas around where we see things going. So to kind of maybe start with your question, I mean, I am one of the things that really drives me at Aviatrix is, we live in this kind of convergence between networking and network security, and network security historically has been one of the really, really important tent poles of any organization's security posture. And fundamentally, the things that we're generally trying to protect against is the internet has been both an amazing, amazing thing for the world and also has created a lot of different challenges. And so when we think about security for businesses, finding ways to be able to protect against outside intrusions while making sure that we can still be open and share our data with our customers when it's secure and appropriate and all those kinds of things. That fundamental challenge is one of the things that we're trying to address, and firewalling as a network security mechanism has been one of those core tenets of a security posture for a very long time. It's that demarcation between our applications, between our end users, and the data, the internet, all of those different things that we both need to defend against and protect. So when I think about trends in the industry, one of the things that I really like to do is I like to go back to the fundamentals. So there's one of the biggest challenges that I think organizations are dealing with right now is the change that the cloud has introduced. right? It's made actually the internet even more important, right? We need to be able to allow our customers to be, our employees, our customers to be mobile, to access their information from anywhere that they might be. Our applications now have also moved from something that used to be a physical four walls that we could control against, and there was a cable that we could plug into the internet. And now we have this cloud where several things have changed. But at the same time, I think one of the things that has actually been a big challenge for organizations is recognizing that things change, but still going back to some of those foundational security principles that have been effective for us in the past, right? Mm. So there's, when we look at, if you were to go Google cloud security today, and really this is kind of the same as what we've been seeing over the last 6-7 years, a lot of what you're going to find are these specific tools specifically for cloud that fall into the cloud security posture management space. Or if we look at some of the really hot players over the last couple of years, like Wiz and Orca and the like next-gen vulnerability management and risk assessment components, and all of those are very interesting tools. But it's important to recognize that we still need to have effective defenses at the edge of the environment. And I think a lot of people use these cloud-centric tools as ways to compensate for the fact that they don't necessarily have perimeter control anymore. Mm-hmm. But I think practically, perimeter control historically has been one of the most effective security controls. So just because it's not physical anymore, and you can't plug a cable in between you and the internet in your firewall, doesn't mean that we should just give up on perimeter security, right? I have a big problem with this. There's a term that's popular in the industry called deperimeterization, which is effectively like, oh man, I lost my four walls. But that doesn't mean that you can't have a virtual perimeter. And what we've seen is a big evolution in what network security looks like for organizations. So obviously things like SASE, Zscaler, Netscope, Prisma Cloud from Palo Alto, Prisma Access from Palo Alto. They changed the way that people do firewalling, but there's still network security for your end users as they leave the environment. What we're really trying to do, and one thing that gets me really excited is, and also a little concerned, is that because cloud historically was driven by developers, and the cloud providers consequently wanted to make the network super, super easy, we see a lot of cloud environments that don't have good foundational network security in them. And so I think one of the reasons that's the case is actually because network security vendors have done a disservice to the industry by not really reinventing their core products to be optimized for the cloud or simplified for the cloud. And so fundamentally, like the big thing that I want to bring is, right, I want to help organizations get back to the fundamentals. I want to help enable people to have good perimeter security control, to be able to control what goes in and out of their environment. And that's one of many, but one of the big contributions that we want to make to the industry is allowing organizations to regain control of their perimeter in a very cloud native and cloud optimized way. But it's about getting back to basics and building out those fundamentals.
Got it. So the perimeter is a very important term here that you used a couple of times. So what's the definition of perimeter, and how do you put this in context with the application, right? Because if you look at the deployments today, some of them are virtual machine based, EC2 instance based. Then we have serverless. Then we have the Kubernetes or microservices type deployment. So the perimeter could be a VPC perimeter, or could it be, or should it be around the application itself? And should it be multiple layers of defense? How would you explain it to our audience?
I think this is an excellent question. I love it because there's some perspectives on this that have evolved, and there's not necessarily a super clear-cut answer here. What I would mark as a perimeter is really the core definition of perimeter is the place where you bridge between the the network that you own and the network that you don't, right? So not necessarily the internet. I mean, it could be a business partner. We think about the concept of DMZs in general in a traditional networking environment, where you might have partners that you're connecting to, you might have third-party services that you connect to, you might allow traffic coming in from the internet. But in general, I would say the most important place to kind of draw a line from a perimeter is that line between the network that you own and the network that you don't. Now in the cloud, that could be a virtual network, and typically is the edge of a VPC, potentially, right, depending on how your network is architected, but that's a very common boundary. Now in the context of what you kind of described, which is making the perimeter smaller, right, or focusing it around the application, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of treat the perimeter virtually, right? So as long as you have really good coverage of, there's a lot of agent-based solutions out there. There's a lot of, Kubernetes cluster-based solutions out there. If you were 100% Kubernetes in your environment, you could probably get away with just having virtualized security on the Kubernetes cluster, and that creates your perimeter. But I think that diversity in workloads is one of the big reasons why it makes so much sense to do this layer of security at the network, because it's the only thing that can really give you coverage across all the different workload types that you have. So I do think one thing that's also interesting about your question is the edge of the VPC is kind of an interesting boundary, but there are some others that we see that are pretty interesting. So most of the cloud providers have these concepts of private endpoints or private links where you're connecting to a third party. A common example of this would be something like Snowflake, or potentially like HashiCorp has their Vault service that's available via private link. That's you connecting to somebody else's network. And it's another place where I see commonly relatively minimal ability to observe and control traffic. So there's some emerging places where there's potential holes in the perimeter that people should consider. But I'll go back to this, right? Moving that perimeter boundary closer to the application is typically where we start to talk about things like microsegmentation. And microsegmentation can be an incredibly powerful security control. But my biggest advice to people is stay practical. And we should start by, if you don't have any firewalling next to the internet, going straight to microsegmentation is not going to be the biggest bang for your buck. Like, let's get started with the foundational pieces and then move to more granular perimeter security controls as the security posture capabilities evolve.
Awesome, very insightful. Thanks. So now we would like to go to our audience. I see a lot of customer prospects and people joining in. Hamid, I think you have a question, so you can go off mute. You can turn your camera on and ask your question.
Actually, I just wanted to invite one of my friends, so he is here now.
Okay.
That was my question, yeah.
Okay, so what's the name of your friend?
He's Bhuvnesh, and we are from one of our partner of Aviatrix.
Okay, awesome. So Bhuvnesh, do you have any question?
Hello, everyone. This is Bhuvnesh. No question for now. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Anybody else?
Me. Excuse. Yeah, me. For security, this start from fundamental, meaning from the account, meaning protection from the account till to do the infrastructure of a network. The most important meaning fundamentals is most important, like from your account. So how to protect your keys, everything. And for infrastructure, we would do the depth and defense and depth, meaning make it many layers of defense. So till if somebody try to breach by minimum to reach to instance or other resources, at least you could the damage would be the minimum. So for PEX, for example, what I want to know, the best practices we should follow, meaning if and standards, those standards I want to know. Best practices for following the depth and defense and
Defense in
depth
depth.
with security.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Great questions, first off. And you highlighted something that I didn't really talk about, but I do talk about kind of on a regular basis, is one of the other biggest changes when you move to the cloud is, if I compare this to a data center, a lot of people used to have these out-of-band management networks, right? So you had a totally separate network that had your management systems on it. And those are some of the most critical pieces because they're the things that control access. You know, if I can get access to vCenter, as an example, then I could have access to literally anything in the environment, right? And what's amazing about cloud is vCenter is now on the internet. And that's the piece that you can't control, right? Effectively, the cloud consoles, the cloud APIs, the things that foundationally control access to your environment are now on the internet. And so you mentioned protecting keys, protecting accounts, IAM privileges, things along those lines. Found like fundamentally, that is a net new thing that we have to take even more seriously than we did when we were on premises. Because of the fact that, you know, that critical part of the infrastructure management plane is now publicly available. So that aside, like, there are some amazing product categories in this space. So cloud infrastructure entitlement management is generally the term that you see, and obviously the cloud providers have a lot of native tools that they're providing now for helping customers manage identity and access management and protecting keys. There's some new authentication mechanisms that are coming out as well. Most of the cloud providers are starting, still pro and con, you have like the roles mechanisms where you can use roles where the keys are automatically rotated for you underneath the covers and you don't ever see it. We also have OIDC, which is kind of an emerging mechanism for enabling cross-account privileges. It's kind of like SAML for applications, effectively. So yes, I don't want to, you asked about defense in depth. I'll talk about that in just a second. But I do really want to highlight the first thing you said, because I think it's really important. It's not really an area that we play in from an Aviatrix perspective, other than, you know, we require some rights to be able to do what we do with customer accounts, but being able to control identity and access management because of that fundamental architectural change where your management console is now publicly accessible, a huge, huge, huge risk. And by the way, when you look at some of the most high profile cloud breaches historically, the Cap One breach was probably the first. Capital One, the credit card company, I'd recommend people go really read how that happened, because it's super interesting. It has to do with exactly what you just described, which was protecting keys and how somebody could extract a key and then use a key in a way that was almost undetectable to exfiltrate data. So very, very important, and something that is certainly different than what we had on-prem. Now, from a defense in depth perspective, we'll pivot there. So now we're looking at infrastructure security and how do we secure communications from that perspective. So obviously we want to think about the different kinds of security. Encryption is obviously a really important baseline layer from a security perspective. The more we can encrypt, there are pros and cons to encryption. Encryption in certain circumstances reduces visibility. It prevents us from doing things like intrusion prevention. But if we think about the benefits of encryption, you know, in general, the trend in the industry is to encrypt more and to start moving more towards zero trust frameworks where it makes sense. So looking at things like mutual TLS authentication, which is really prevalent in the Kubernetes environments. So encryption is obviously one layer. From a network security perspective, the two layers that I typically see in the cloud are some form of traditional network security, some form of firewalling, effectively a network-based control that sits outside of the workload that has a lot of the more rich functionality like visibility, potentially the ability to enforce dynamic zero trust policy, the ability to inspect traffic, decrypt traffic, match it against signatures, things like that, that more rich next generation firewall style functionality. We still see that being very important. We also have new controls in the cloud. So we have security groups, network security groups in Azure, VPC firewall, and Google, giving you the ability to have a layered defense where we have a control that is sitting right at the network interface of the workload, and then we have a control that's sitting at some sort of choke point in the environment. The way that we typically implement this with distributed cloud firewall is that it's at the edge of a VPC. So you have this, we generally call it the blast radius, right? So how can I have a control that sits really close to the workload and then have also a smaller blast radius? If that workload gets compromised, I have another control in place that can help limit that. We generally, if you want to think about it this way, I have a framework that I use a lot of the time that says, I want to think about controls in 3 different types of network patterns, and then consider what my defense in depth is there. So the network pattern number 1 is ingress traffic. So this is traffic that's coming into your environment. Could be a trusted user, could be an untrusted user, could be another application, right? But it's something that's inbound traffic, typically coming from the outside in, from the cloud. So a user or device coming to an application. This is a place where historically we used firewalls, and sometimes we used web application firewalls. So things from like, F5 and Imperva, vendors like that. Most of the load balancers in the cloud today have the ability to do web application firewalling. And I personally believe if I were building a network security posture today in my own enterprise, I would probably not have a network firewall on ingress. The vast majority of traffic today is HTTPS. And to really be able to apply security to that traffic, we have to be able to decrypt it. And the best place to decrypt that traffic is at the load balancer. So if I can put security into the load balancer or have a service that acts as a front door, like Azure Front Door or something along those lines, that does that security for me, that is going to cover 99% of the traffic profiles that we see today. And it's going to be better, actually, than what we would see with a firewall. In fact, some of the challenges with network firewalling on ingress, decryption is a real big challenge on ingress. One of the most common mechanisms is to put your private key on a firewall, which has its own like serious risks with it, right? I mean, if you can exfiltrate a private key, then you can decrypt all the traffic. So WAFs, incredibly important in modern cloud security. So ingress is one of those buckets that I like to think about. So you're going to have some sort of advanced network security for ingress, typically a WAF, and then you're going to have a security group, which is your depth control. The next pattern that I like to look at, and I think this is the second most important pattern, is egress. So egress is that outbound traffic that's initiated from one of your workloads to the internet. Now, the default posture in most security groups today is allow all egress traffic. And so it is super, super common that we see 0 controls here. So yes, ideally we would want defense in depth. I'll tell you, one of my big passions here is just getting defense at all in organizations. And so that's I think one thing to think about. But in the context of the egress traffic pattern, there's slightly different requirements. So this is something that, especially for applications, is a good candidate for a zero trust posture. So apps tend to have relatively predictable communication patterns. They're constantly talking to similar services or similar S3 buckets or similar APIs or things along those lines. So being able to do layer 7 based domain filtering with potentials for decryption, for deep packet inspection, that kind of stuff, can really, really make a big impact in the security posture. Now, if I think about the life cycle of an attack, so it starts by somebody getting into your environment. That's ingress. If I can block them there, great. I might not be able to block them. But let's say that I can't block them. So that's one layer. Layer one is stop them from getting in, right? We're using, actually, when we think about depth, we're thinking about it from the perspective of the attack, the kill chain or the MITRE attack matrix or something along those lines, right? Not necessarily I went through 3 or 4 checkpoints, but I have controls at different layers of MITRE attack. So we block them at ingress. Let's say they get through at ingress. The next thing that they're going to do is they're going to try to install malware or establish some form of command and control channel back to something, right? So we generally refer to this as establishing persistence. Egress security can be an incredible depth control in that scenario, because even if the attacker exploits a vulnerability, if they can't get the data out or they can't establish a control channel back, then we stop the attack before anything happens, right? So you can think about that depth in a slightly different way of how do I address different parts of the kill chain. And then the third category of network security is east-west controls, or how we control lateral movement in the environment. Again, an important part of the kill chain. This is typically a more difficult thing to do because it's a messier environment and many organizations don't understand their applications very well. Oftentimes, again, we see this being more relevant at layer 4 than layer 7 because applications are oftentimes encrypted nowadays, and performance is really, really important in these environments. So when we look at what we're doing from a distributed cloud firewall perspective, we focus on egress and east-west. Like I said beforehand, I think layer 7 WAF is really the next most common way of doing ingress security. SASE is another important tool in that space as well. But egress and east-west security can also provide depth layers because we're addressing different parts of the kill chain. East-west is addressing the lateral movement part of the kill chain. Egress is addressing the established persistence, the command and control, and the data exfiltration parts of the kill chain. So it's not just necessarily I went through multiple firewalls, as much as it is how do I have the ability to stop an attacker at each part of the attack lifecycle.
Right. Very good. Thanks, Chris, for a very detailed answer here. Anyone else from the audience? Alvin, Almar, Tudor, do you guys have any question?
Yeah. For security would be shared responsibility between the customer and the provider, or only in the customer will be responsible for all security in this one, and as a concept.
Yeah. Okay. So first off, I think it's important as organizations to recognize that we are always responsible for our own security. The shared security model is really important. There are parts of security that you are not responsible for, right? You're not responsible for somebody breaking into the data center and stealing the disk that your workload is running on. You're not responsible for security if somebody, happens to tap one of the cables in the data center, right? The cloud provider is responsible for making sure that you can't see somebody else's data. But in terms of all of the things that you have the potential to configure, network security controls, IAM privileges, all of those kinds of things, that is absolutely our responsibility, right? That is your responsibility. That is our responsibility. That is not the cloud provider's responsibility. So the shared security model is interesting, but I think sometimes people lean too much on the shared security model as an excuse to some extent, right? This is a little, you can look at the shared security model in 2 ways. When you read it, because it's very important to read it, like half of it is what is the cloud provider responsible for, half of it is what are you responsible for. And it's important for them to detail that as well, because it's also, it's kind of like a limited liability clause, right? If you don't take your side of the bargain seriously and you get breached, it is not the cloud provider's fault. So I recommend that all customers take ownership, right? Don't lean on the shared security model as to some too much comfort. I think about the shared security model as effectively My data is not accessible to other people's unless I let them, give them, access to it. And the physical security of the data centers is not my responsibility. Other than that, it's ours. And so we need to think about how, again, do we implement controls, and specifically, oftentimes this is configuration, but it could be additional security controls that you layer on top of that, that give us that take us to the appropriate level of security posture, depending on the type of data that we're the custodians of.
Yep, that's great. Yeah, thanks, Mohammed, for asking this question. Anyone else before I ask a question, because I have this burning question, and you guys all know about this question. I'm pretty sure you would have it in top of your mind, but let me ask this on your behalf. So, Chris, as you know that there is a big buzzword in the industry today called AI or Gen AI, right? Mm-hmm. So I would like to know how this new technology or evolved technology, it's not new, obviously, AI has been there for quite some time now, is going to change the security, or especially cloud security landscape. How is it going to impact the cloud operational model, design models, or will create more challenges for us, or how do you see it?
Like any new technology, and I see AI, there's a lot of things that have hype. You could say blockchain had a lot of hype a few years ago, still does, right? Gartner is very famous for its hype cycle, which allows us to kind of objectively look at when things have more promise than they're ultimately going to deliver. We need to be conscious of that. But I do see Gen AI in general, but Gen AI specifically, as a big transition point for us, honestly, probably as a society. It is, to me, the analogy that I use for it is, I don't think it's going to go replace everybody's jobs tomorrow, but it's a lot like Google, right? Before Google, the internet was relatively unusable. After Google, the internet was very usable. And if you were good at using Google, then you were much more efficient at your jobs. So there are going to be so many different applications of Gen AI in the security space to improve efficiency. One of the big things that I'm super excited about, and that we announced a partnership with Microsoft on, is their Security Copilot product. And if you've been in the security space for a while, one of the things that is really, really challenging in security is, how do we identify the needle in the haystack? When I have all of these logs, all of these things coming in, I've got logs from appliances, I've got access logs to my cloud portals, I've got my vulnerability management system, I've got all this information. How do I make sense of it and understand and find people who are potentially trying to intrude into my environment, right? And there's a lot of things that people are trying to do to solve this problem. The SIM space, Splunk as an example, which was obviously recently acquired by Cisco and is one of the leaders in the SIM space, still requires a lot of very custom manual searching through mountains of data, and it does an amazing job of doing that really, really quickly. But it's not as simple as, hey, I saw this threat. Now tell me what ports and protocols were open for this server, and what are all the 10 other things that I need to know as a part of this investigation. How do I pivot and track? And actually, a threat hunter, in a security term, acts a lot like a detective, right? You're kind of walking through and trying to decode what's happening. And so you're asking all these questions, and Security Copilot is super, super interesting. But in general, we will see the behavior or the day-to-day work of a threat hunter totally change from something that is a very specific, query-oriented process to something that is a lot more natural language, has the ability to really accelerate that process. And so those types of interfaces, I think, are very, very interesting. I also see a lot of opportunity, and you'll see us start to release some product enhancements in this space of helping customers manage and deploy policy. So there's been this concept in the industry for a while of something called intent-based networking or zero trust policy, or there's lots of different variations. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to write a rule set to enforce my security policy, to build that defense in depth in a way that is, hey, I want this app to talk to this other app. And the practicality of that is that requires a lot of knowledge. I got to go make sure the app is tagged, and I got to make sure I know its IP addresses, and then I got to figure out where it lives in the network, and I got to figure out where to put it. And that's another place where I think you'll start to see some of the influences of generative AI that allow us to do a better job of automatically discovering applications and helping you accelerate your journey along zero trust. So there's a lot of positives, I think, that we'll see in how Gen AI impacts the day-to-day operations and ultimately makes those more efficient so that we can be more secure. That being said, there's a lot of challenges that Gen AI is going to bring. And some of those things are, there's layers and layers of this, right? But we're going to start seeing a lot more spam emails get through. And so it's now much more difficult to profile a spam email because it's being written by a computer that has a very strong control or understanding of whatever language for the person that they're targeting, right? And so
scary.
Right, it's crazy, right? So so those adding in ensuring that we have that defense in depth from a control perspective, especially after the initial exploit, especially after initial, the initial button is clicked that downloads the malware, becomes even more important. Now, from a cloud perspective, we've seen Gen AI drive multi-cloud adoption. And I think that we're actually going to see this as a transition that allows new cloud providers to start to gain popularity. So we've already seen this. There's a number of specialty AI ML clouds out there. There's even some, I just ran across a broker the other day, I think it was Skylark or something like that, who front ends all these clouds so that you always have GPU availability, even if the cloud is not ready for it. So making sure that we can, anytime you adopt a new cloud, and this is one of the places that is really important for the things that we do, you need to be able to quickly apply the same security controls to that cloud as you might have in your primary cloud. So you might be single cloud today. Gen AI is going to put pressure on that, because if you have a business application that needs GPU availability and that cloud doesn't have it, you're going to have to figure out how do we use services in other clouds. And it's also a big differentiator for that. And so that, I think, is very actionable. It's how do we build our stack in a way that is flexible and able to respond to the business needs, and is a core place where we play from an Aviatrix perspective. And then the last piece is there's a lot of much lesser understood components of Gen AI security. And that is, how do we prevent things like data leaks as we're training models? Like, what is there's a lot of, one of the challenges with AI and deep learning specifically, and Gen AI, is that we still don't have explainability in the model. So you can't see when something ingests and does its training, you can't really understand what's in there or what it's going to put out. And so there are tons of opportunities in this space. There's a lot of research going on around model safety. And the challenge that we have right now is that we're going to have to go down this road, I think, unfortunately, as a society, before we fully understand it, just because of the economic pressures around adopting Gen AI. AWS has some really good articles on this. There's a lot of good topics in the space, but I would say there's some really practical things that AI is going to bring to the table. There's some really, well-known challenging things that AI is going to bring to the table. There's some actions we can take, like making sure that we're prepared to have our general security posture ready in the different environments that the business is going to demand. And then there's some places we just need to tread with caution and keep up to speed on what the latest research is telling us. And that's really around model explainability, model safety, and potential mechanisms for malicious training of models, data exfiltration in models. Those are lesser known spaces that are certainly emerging.
Cool. Thanks for the insightful answer, Chris. Any follow-up question from the audience before we move towards the end of our presentation? Yeah,
yes. With the GNI, we need a threat signature so the model need to know adapts the threat patterns. So as every time there's no threat coming, new threat, and that is to a new that is new. So that model need more signature to learn. So with GNS, with the GNI AI as a general, will be improve the security as in the cloud or in general, meaning which level we can reach with the AI with the threat signature patterns.
Yeah, so I really, this is where I honestly, going back to the basics, I think is incredibly important, because you're exactly right. There will be, there's a whole other thing around malware that's authored by Gen AI. There's been a thing with malware for a while that is, oh gosh, I'm going to blank on the term, but malware that can effectively rewrite itself so that it doesn't have the same hash value every single time that it comes in. So that this problem of struggling to identify malware based on signatures. In fact, I think signatures in general are going to be much, much more challenging to use as a foundational security control, because you will have effectively malware that can rewrite itself, and we're going to have a lot more of it too, right? So yes, we need to continue to keep up to speed with signatures, and we obviously will do that. But I think it's important to look more at behavioral characteristics and defense in depth, because independent of it does also make zero trust even more valuable, right? So signatures there's really two different approaches, obviously, to making implementing security controls. There is the detect what's bad. There's like basic things. Detect what's bad, which is typically the signature-based approach, or allow what's good and deny everything else. And so that second model, I'm going to allow known good things and deny everything else, that's the zero trust model. The powerful thing about zero trust is that it actually doesn't need nearly as much. The importance of signatures is significantly less in those types of policy environments than it is in the traditional signature-based environment, right? That detect what's bad. So I do think that part of this is, again, another trigger for organizations to take zero trust approaches more seriously, and look at that on the most impactful areas of the kill chain, again, on ingress and egress. So if you have those controls, right, if we go back to the basics, if we think about fundamentally what's happening, we need to think about what is an attacker going to do that's ultimately going to do something bad to me. And I don't care what a signature is, if I can block their command and control channel, which has almost nothing to do with Gen AI, then we stop an attack, right? So certainly there's going to be more advanced things. There's going to be more things that we need to do to detect. We're going to use AI to detect AI. There's a lot of things that are, working on that in the industry, but I think this will be, to be perfectly honest, another catalyst towards completely changing the way we approach security and moving towards more of a zero trust oriented model, because it will reduce our dependency on the accuracy of signatures, because signatures are going to get less and less accurate over time.
Right. Exciting times ahead of us. We are all actually sitting in the middle of it. So yeah, great to see our audience, our community also taking advantage of a lot of resources, a lot of knowledge from us and from other vendors as well, right? So this is going to be my last question, and then we're going to wrap up the show. So please let us, our professional, know how can they stay up to date about these latest advancements. You mentioned zero trust security, you mentioned perimeter defense, so many other things. Like where can they go to learn about this and stay up to date?
Yeah. So there's some great training organizations that have both really good up-to-date best practice security controls. I always recommend looking at CISA. So CISA is the Center for Internet Security and Agency or something like that. It's the US kind of Department for Cybersecurity recommendations, right? So they publish a lot of guides on best practices on how to secure environments. They have guides around cloud security, around zero trust. They tend to put out good notifications when there's emerging threats. There's also, really good, there's some great threat-oriented vendors out there. That's one thing that we don't really do. We partner with vendors for threat. Like we fully recognize this as a specialized area. So when you look at one of my favorite vendors is Mandiant. So Mandiant is owned by Google Cloud today. They put out a ton of great research. The other place that I really, really like for security training is this organization called the SANS Institute. So SANS. I've presented there a couple times. They've got a ton of really, really smart threat they facilitate vendor oriented sessions, but also non-vendor specific sessions just around education. And again, there's some great organizations out there, some great certifications, but I like to kind of stay up to speed with both some of the alert oriented mechanisms like CISA, best practice oriented mechanisms like CISA, CIS, the CIS benchmarks are a really good framework for securing applications. And then SANS is an excellent educational tool. And then, when you're thinking about some of the practical things that we talked about, like how do I build a secure perimeter in the cloud? A little bit more specific, but we have an ACE security certification. So I would recommend that if that's something that's of interest to you and you have a need in that foundational security area, we can help give you practical education on how to start approaching those problem solutions.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot for joining us. Katie, over to you.
Yeah, so thanks again, Chris, and thanks, Shazad, for hosting Chris this morning. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I did drop a link in the chat, so if you would not mind letting us know what you thought. This is also an opportunity to request future topics. So with that, I think that's it. Thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right.
Hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.